One thing I want to point out right before I dive into my presentation is Joe mentioned it a couple of times. At Ogden, I know our mayor from Mara, who's our CAO, we are excited about new development and new opportunities within the city. And staff, I think all of us together are excited to try and help make a lot of these ideas become a reality. And that's something that's important to us and something we want to make sure we're able to try and help your group and help anyone that comes into Ogden try and achieve. Now, that's to be said as I start to get into some engineering standards. So this is the most exciting point of the night, regardless of what Joe just said a few minutes ago. But I'm really excited. My name is Taylor Nielsen. I am the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer. I am also the city engineer. And so I am grateful for the opportunity to stand in front of you tonight for a few minutes. So as we get in, if you guys are having trouble falling asleep one night, might I recommend the 2025 edition of the Ogden City Engineering Standards. Full of information, it's fantastic. However, there's a lot of great information, and what we've tried to do is when you're coming in with development, we've tried to create what we consider a guide for generally your professional or someone that you would be working with to help guide you through the process when it comes to engineering related items. Based on all of our years of experience, we tried to set things out in the logistical development standpoint from what we would normally see coming through engineering and engineering related permits. And so we tried to do that accordingly. Again, it's full of a lot of numbers and equations and super exciting stuff for me. However, sometimes that just means that we'll have some really good conversations with your design professional, and we'll make sure that we can keep the project going and moving in the right direction. So the first item I want to get into is when would we hire a professional? The hard part with items dealing specifically with engineering, sometimes we're going to be looking at water systems, sewer systems, stormwater systems. We'll get into roadways, connections. You'd be surprised how many items start to come into play. As soon as we start doing stuff on the outside of the building and we're installing different items, we would recommend at that time, get a professional. And at that instance, if you have a professional engineer or a professional architect, they can help you through our process. And like Joe mentioned in the CRT meeting, we can help navigate them and push them and you in that right direction. It's not needed on all projects, but if we have to start calculating the velocity in your water mains and your service laterals coming in, it's a super fun process for those of us that are engineers. Everyone else tells me it's not as exciting. So that's probably a time we'd look to that. If you're doing grading and drainage plans, those are good ideas. Also, if we're dealing with flood control measures. Flooding has a good tendency to cause major problems with new buildings. And so if you are worried about it, I would recommend hiring an engineer and making sure that all that stuff's taken care of. The other one we talk about is utility designs. If you need a fire line in your building, if you're worried about fire hydrant placement, if you're starting to get into some different sort of boring connections or work, or ultimately if you start really dealing with some complex related items, we would recommend trying to get someone on your team at that point. And from our experience, I'll say my experience, I'll see if I get some head nods from this group. Generally, when we engage a professional early on in these complex projects, overall, we've seen faster turnarounds, faster timeframes, and a quicker outcome. Joe, I know you're going to shake your head yes. And I say that important because what'll start to happen is sometimes people will bring in their project and they'll come submit something to us. Once they do, we'll say, this is great, now let's hire a professional. Well, then there's a lag and there's a time frame. And that's all time that you guys could take advantage of up front before submitting to us in the process. However, if you have questions, that's what that CRT process was for that Joe mentioned. Also, if you're doing any work in the right-of-way, if you're going to cut into the streets, if you're going to try and tie into one of our mains, I would recommend you talking to a professional. It's just a good, probably practice. We can work through with you. We have staff that's available to help answer questions. But like I said, it's probably a good idea to make sure that we have someone on board and ready. So our submittal process, if you're going to we'll talk about site improvements first. If you're just working, you're improving inside of a building, it'll be a different process. If you're deciding you're going to go take on a site and do some new stuff, you will have to start looking at water service connections, your different meters, fire lines, and hydrant locations. It sounds simple until you have to start spacing hydrants. And our fire marshal gets pretty particular about how far apart they need to be. Then let's talk about what size you need your main or your lateral to be coming off of the main. There's a whole bunch of different questions that'll all start coming up as you start going through that process. All right, so now we've got the water into the building. What do we do with the water and other items that are leaving the building? Also an item you want to make sure doesn't fail or have any issues. So sewer is the next thing that we'll start looking into, and then we'll start talking about flooding and other related items for storm drainage. These are all items that you'll have to start looking at as part of your site plan and those other review processes. Also too then would be the grading plans. You'd be surprised how often we review a grading plan and somebody has graded all the water to go in their front door or in their garage. So we are happy to take a second look at that to make sure that everything's okay. Happens more often than we think. I know Joe's nodding his head. Christian, you probably see it more than I do. But it's something that we as the city, we offer these items as a service to you to make sure we don't get to the site and have problems and other issues. Because I believe starting a business, getting everything up and running is hard enough. We want to make sure that the rest of the process, as best as we can help you through and make sure there's as few problems as possible. And sometimes we're willing to come argue with a contractor for you, but not always. There's also items that we talk about. We talk about grading plan, drainage plan, curb gutter sidewalk, and then we start talking about pavement sections. How thick does the asphalt need to be? Those are other items that we start getting into as part of the conversations. And you wouldn't think that, hey, I have to tie a water and a sewer main or lateral into the mains that are out in the road. That can't be that complicated. Some instances it's not. Some instances it gets incredibly complicated based on the infrastructure we have in the area. So we have engineers and permitting staff that are there at the front counter that are available for these questions, who are also part of the CRT meeting, that will make sure that we can help answer and take care of those considerations as we're moving through. There's also, we get into utility easements as we start talking about different plats and other items as they come through. So we want to make sure that those are clearly defined and we don't have any questions, and we're ensure that development can always move forward in the direction it needs to. One item I wanted to point out, we love sidewalks, and this is normally a planning thing, but I wanted to point out downtown sidewalks, but I do this on purpose. There are different regulations in different areas. So if you're building a subdivision, you're building a house, you're out in a neighborhood, you're going to have one sidewalk per regulation and standard. If you're in the downtown, you may have something different. And so that's what we want to make sure of is help you catch some of those items, or your design profession will generally know where to find these items and will allow us to have some of those conversations. So this is just an example of something that they would expect here in the downtown. So you can just see how quickly a project becomes even more complicated than was originally anticipated. I'll briefly talk about these. We want to make sure when you're bringing in a new business that you take time to review your sewer lateral. We always recommend to people that you get your camera, or your lateral cameraed, and check the condition. I also make sure that if you're bringing in, new fixtures, new appliances, new whatever, that you have enough capacity in that lateral to ensure that all the sewage goes down the main. That's the important part. I want it to leave your building. I want it to become our problem after. I've seen it where it hasn't always worked out that way, so we're very particular to make sure that you're trying to do and look into those items. The other thing we check on is there an increased impact into the system. If there is, we have to have additional conversations, not just with us at the city, but also with our partners at Central Weaver, where we'll have some of these different conversations. Now, a really complicated chart that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to step through this and we're going to read line by line on all these. I'm not going to read any of it. Is what happens if you're bringing in, for instance, a food establishment. We have what's called a gravity grease interceptor. The gravity grease interceptor is something that we will put in place after certain appliances or other items within your kitchen or different areas that help remove some of the grease and other items from the system before it goes into the sewer. It causes us a whole lot of problems. It causes the sewer district a whole lot of issues. So we have these requirements that are in place from the health department, from the building code, and also from the engineering standards of trying to catch these items before they make their way out. If you're looking into doing one of those type businesses that the health department or us at the city are going to require some sort of grease removal device, come and talk to us. Don't let it be a surprise. Just let's have the conversation, and the CRT is a great place, or call us on our permits desk. Let's make sure that we're talking about it. We've tried to place charts and other items on the website, but again, sometimes they get complicated. So I can tell you exactly what this means. If you have everything else going on in your development project, we are happy to try and walk you through this and explain what you can expect and what may be coming next. This is the other thing is, so our staff will flow through this chart no problem. So they'll make sure if you're here, where do they need to end up and at which direction are they going? But again, this is just an example of how quickly we can be overwhelmed as part of that development process. And we want to make sure that you know that we're available to help navigate our way through this. So yeah, you could start your way. Oh no, I thought it would point. I broke it. But you see how quickly you can start up there, and a myriad of yes and no's can get you to some unknown place on the chart. Our goal is, like I said from the start, is we want to make sure that we can help you and get your development going. And this is just another process and step that we don't want it to be painful. We just want you to know that we're here to help and make sure. It is necessary. We just need to get through the process. Stormwater standards. Now, I talked about the engineering standards before. If you're doing a large and complicated site, I wrote the backup to the engineering standards, and this is a stormwater drainage manual. This is even more action-packed than the engineering standards was. This manual is generally if you're doing a lot of different items on probably a large sort of drainage basin. However, if you are looking at stuff for the business, this does have some regulations and other items in there of stuff that we can go through. So we created that. It has the stormwater standards, and then we had to update some requirements. So when you're under construction, the state has requirements for us of what we're supposed to be requiring of you. It's exciting, I know. But generally we want to make sure we're not putting polluted water back into the stormwater system, especially during construction. So most of the stormwater mains, especially here in the downtown, have a pretty quick outlet to the river. And we're pretty particular on how our rivers look here in the downtown. If you haven't had a chance to go down and see the Ogden River, it's beautiful. And our goal is we're aiming to maintain that sort of clear water that we have in those runs. And knowing how close a lot of these storm drain connections are to the river, we're pretty particular to make sure that it stays that way. So as we're going through some of these construction standards, we just want to make sure that we're able to follow some of those. Generally, contractors will get mad at us. I'm sorry for that. However, thank you for helping keep Ogden beautiful, because it makes a big difference for us. LID practices, I just wanted to mention this real quick. This is another state requirement. We have found creative ways to help with. This is a water quality requirement. So if you are trying to do new development outside of your building, there are certain items you'll have to put in place for water quality. LID is the requirement the state put in, so they have a flow requirement of how much flow can leave, and then we have a flood control requirement. So that becomes a fun conversation for us and your design professional. Generally speaking, we've got pretty good at combining the two together and ensuring that we can accommodate both and not have additional or oversized infrastructure. Water standards. When you're putting in a new water service, we don't want everyone to have to put in a massive 24-inch water line. Generally, we like to limit those to just the ones that we maintain. So the question comes down to, how big is my service that I put in? Do I put in a 1-inch, an 1.5 inches, a 2-inch? Those are the processes that we'll help go through with your design professional, and then try and make sure that we have the meters sized appropriately. So these are all questions and lists that we're trying to evaluate, review as we're going on in the process. The other reason why that's important is you don't want to have a 4-inch meter. A 4-inch meter, probably just the vault itself, cost about $12,000. So if we can design it appropriately, we'll make sure that we can keep you within the correct standard or the places that you need to be. Traffic studies. If you're going in a UDOT road, if UDOT's fronting on your property, you most likely will have to do a traffic study. If you don't know which roads are owned by UDOT, they're generally the busiest ones. Harrison, 12th Street, Washington, Wall, and then random portions like 24th from Washington to Wall, Harrisville Road for a little bit, portions over here in Riverdale Road. It's and then 24th Street going out that way. And then there's more. If you're not sure, or if you think you're on a busy road, keep that in mind. That'll be part of your review process, as well as going in and talking to UDOT. Traffic impact studies, we have these requirements that we put out, but what we're trying to ensure, if you're generating a lot of traffic to your site, that we're not causing undue impact or anything else to the different areas. And so it's a good way for us just to make sure that traffic keeps flowing and moving. I don't know about you, I've been stuck in traffic where I felt like I haven't made my way through a signal before, and I get frustrated. We're trying to make sure that doesn't happen here in Ogden. So we're pushing through, making sure that we're keeping the correct level of service on all the different roads. And that was all that I had for engineering stuff. So thank you.